Today we're going to do a data analysis on the upper level spelling inventory from Words Their Way. The feature analysis does a few things. As you can see, it shows orthographic features. It's an analysis that provides us with qualitative information regarding spelling features, depending on where the child is on that continuum. We want to combine this information, of course, with their reading and their writing. No one assessment can stand alone. So it's the whole package at looking at multiple assessments of a child that helps us better impact our instruction. And the instructional level is where the student will be using information, but also confusing. So understand that that's instructional level. So let's look at our student. We have a video of a student doing the upper level spelling inventory. She's 10 years and 6 months. She's in the 4th grade and she really enjoys reading and made a comment to me that she particularly likes vocabulary and playing around with words. Let's go ahead and look at one of the inventories. So let's look at the word list for the upper level spelling inventory. And as you can see that there's 31 words and they're ordered by difficulty that also show particular features of each word. When we go to the feature analysis, that's where we really break apart each word to look at what the child is able to use, perhaps what she is confusing, and what she has not accomplished at this point. All right, so let's look at her particular spelling inventory. When we went through, she said each word and wrote down. As you'll note from the video, occasionally she tried to sound something out. She even questioned whether she thought it sounded right. She asked me if it was correct. I did give her a little bit of reassurance, but I also did not give her the information she needed to be able to spell that word. So let's look at some of these and where she perhaps made some mistakes. So she started off very strong with switch, smudge, knotted. And as we go down, we get to crater. Crater, we see that she mistaken the OR for an ER. Sailor, village, disloyal, tunnel, humor, confidence. I thought that was really great that she was able to get through confidence with the ENCE ending. Fortune, now visible. A common mistake at her level. The next one, she really did work through this quite seriously, but it's circumference. I'm betting it's a word she hasn't used a whole lot in her background knowledge, given the fact that she is only in 4th grade. Here's civilization. She's right on monarchy, dominance. Here we have correspond. Illiterate, emphasize, opposition. This is chlorine. I thought that was really great the way she tried hard. Look at how she used an EA. She knew that. She knew the CL. She perhaps is not familiar with this combination at this point. Let's go ahead and scroll this down so we can look at the rest of her words. We have medicinal, irresponsible, and succession. Oftentimes at this level, we have issues with this S-I-O-N, T-I-O-N, these types of endings with affixes when you're working with those. All right, so what does this tell us? There's a couple different tables that you'll find in your Words Their Way book that I want to refer to. The first being the power scores and estimated stages. When you're looking at this, we have the inventories along the left-hand side. So we have the primary, the elementary, and the upper level spelling inventory. And then as we move our way across the chart, we have emergent letter name, within word, syllable and affix, and derivational relations. This is where we're really going to see how your student ranks according to which inventory and what stage that they're in. Going back, early derivational relation stage, which is where this child happened to fall, the words are derived through additions of syllables and affixes. There's a lot of vocabulary development, and there's logical spelling meaning connections. These are very key points because this is where you're going to start with your instructional strategies. What are you going to do? Where are you going to work with this child? And what are you going to bring into the classroom so she can continue to move through the stages? Let's look at the characteristics of her particular stage. So the characteristics of a derivational relation speller. She's at the early stage. So we have trapped, humor, sailor, confidence for confidence, opposition for opposition. It's a little hard to say those incorrectly. She got some of those wrong. She got some of those correct. She actually, the chlorophyll, she had chlorine. Notice that she had some problems with that. What did they do correctly? When you look at any assessment that you do with a child, always make sure that you look at what they do well first. What can the child do? Because that's the type of information you're going to use to springboard into new learning. Don't always look at what they can't do. Work with what they can and move off of that. So they're spelling most of the words correctly. The vowel patterns are in accented syllables, and the doubling and E drop at the syllable juncture. The child is able to do that. What do they confuse? So again, this is that they can use but confuse. Unstressed vowels in derivational related pairs, for instance, confident. Some suffixes and prefixes. Notice that she had the TION and the SION, those types of endings incorrect. Other spelling and meaning connections with criticize and critic. This is the time when we start looking at Latin and Greek roots. These are great opportunities for students to learn a lot about vocabulary. It was great that our student likes vocabulary. She can start to explore words, and that will bring her vocabulary even wider as she expands on those roots. And what's absent, really, there's no features that are completely absent. When we do the feature analysis, you'll really be able to see that clearly. A couple things I want you to be careful about and pay attention to, which are common confusions. They don't apply necessarily to this particular student, but they do across the board when you're doing spelling inventories. This happens to be found on page 34 of your Words Their Way text. Static reversals, that B for D. A lot of students in the early stages are confusing B's and D's. We don't mark those incorrect. They are counted as correct, but always make sure that you make a note of it. It's like in any assessment, even a running record, you may not mark it as incorrect, but you are going to make an annotation about it, so when you go back to analyze that data, you know what's going on. And kinetic reversals. Those are letters that are present but can be out of order. A lot of times this can happen with vowels, or we have an added vowel. Early stages, we give credit for vowels and consonants, but we don't give credit for the correct spelling if those are out of order. And with older students, or let's say more advanced stages, sometimes they add a vowel marker. Again, we give the credit for the vowels and consonants, but not for the correct spelling. We see this when we do the feature analysis. All right, so let's go ahead and go to a blank feature guide so we can kind of look and see what that looks like for an upper level inventory. When you look at an inventory, a blank sheet, down the left-hand side you have the spelling words, or the words that you're giving the child. Across the top you have our levels. So we have spelling stage within word, syllable and affixes, and derivational relations. Then we really get into the features. So blends and digraphs, vowels, complex consonants, inflected endings and syllable juncture, and unaccented final syllables, affixes, reduced vowels and unaccented syllables, Greek and Latin elements, etc. Notice that we talked about a few of these things. We talked about affixes, we talked about Greek and Latin elements when we were doing her spelling assessment and marking some correct words. So we'll see where those really fall in when we look at her particular feature guide as it's been scored. Let's look at chlorine. When our student read that word, we know that we had an affix of INE and then a Greek and Latin element with the chlor, and she had difficulties with both of those. If I remember correctly, she was an EAN and then a CLOR. And so neither one of those were correct. Commotion, again, we have this TION. So we'll put check marks when she did something correctly, but we want to make sure that we mark what the child did when it was done incorrectly. And I'll show you a completed feature analysis. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at our particular student's feature guide and how we scored that. So you'll see I have check marks down the left-hand side of those words that she said correctly, or excuse me, spelled correctly. I also want to make sure that there's a check mark next to each feature. If you just take a quick glance, what are we seeing? We're seeing a lot of check marks as we come over. We're getting past within word, going into syllable and affix. Could have a little bit of problems there. I see the OR for the ER, but we're into the derivational relations stage, and that's where we start to get some using but confusing marks. The one thing that wasn't marked on here yet is the word spelled correctly. Remember that they get feature points and they get words spelled correctly. I've got the totals down at the bottom, but let's go ahead and fill out those columns. So for switch, for instance, she has 3 feature points and the word is spelled correctly. All right? Smudge, same. Trapped, 2. She has that spelled correctly. Scrape, there's 2, has that spelled correctly, etc. So we move on down through our chart as we mark those particular features and words spelled correctly. Let's go down to the bottom when we started to have some using but confusing with visible. Okay, so visible is V-I-S-I-B-L-E, and she put in A-B-L-E. I wanted to make sure that I wrote down exactly what she put for hers, but she did get the V-I-S correct on the root. Circumference, she kind of got those confused in both, but she's close. She's got this A-N-C-E instead of an E-N-C-E, something that we can definitely work with when we're doing affixes and doing some particular lessons with her. And then the circumference as well, the circum as our root. Civilization, we have the L-I-Z, which she actually did get correct, but had some problems with civilization. Interestingly enough, I wonder if we asked her to spell civil as in like the Civil War, if she would know how to spell that. Those are great links that we can make because she can start seeing that meaning and spelling relationship going on and start to think about, oh, where have I seen these words before? Just like circumference and thinking about math or something mathematical, has she seen those before? We have our subtotals down at the bottom. As you can see, we have 1 here, not too worried about that. We've got 2 here. This is something I'm going to star because I think affixes is definitely an area that she's going to benefit from some instruction. And again, over here with our Greek and Latin roots. All right, now let's move on to the second page of her feature analysis. And as you'll see, we're really now heavily into the derivational relations stage. And so we've got lots of markings of things that she was using but confusing. All right, monarchy, we're good. Dominance, but correspond, we started to have some issues, the RAS for the RES. But notice that she did do her double letters really well. Look at that. 6 out of 6 on those assimilated prefixes. That's absolutely wonderful. She actually does really, really well on the reduced vowels and unaccented syllables as well. Perhaps she's had more experience with that. Again, where's our areas that we're looking at? Right here. Affixes and the Greek and Latin elements. what we're doing is we're starting to see patterns. We're seeing patterns of where she's really using and confusing, but we can use that for strategies in instruction going forward. That's what we're looking for. What are we going to be able to do? How am I going to set a plan for her in the classroom to help her move forward into the middle and late stages as she goes through the school year? Notice that her feature points were 57 out of 68. I think that's really wonderful. And her words spelled correctly were 22 out of 31. We bring the subtotals from the other page and then the totals from this page to bring our completed totals at the bottom. All right, so let's think of these 3 points. This all comes from your text as well, page 290. This is, general of the 3 points and what they're saying when we're talking about instruction. What are we going to do when we're working with her in a classroom? First of all, be generative. When I'm talking about being generative, I'm talking about teaching words in meaning families. We talked about civil. So civil, civilization, other words that come along that have the same roots or words that have similar affixes. Initial words selected should have obvious relationships. We don't just pull words from all different places. We want to have their relationships and meaning and spelling relationships, as well as how do these words relate to each other. And it's always great to do it with a particular unit of study that you're working on, whether that be a science or social studies, or even with math terms is a great place to be doing a lot of Greek and Latin roots. And third is there has to be a balance. We need a balance between what's teacher directed and what is explorative for children, what the students are looking for, what they're going into books or what they're seeing in their own reading and writing. If we go way back to the beginning of our discussion today, we talked about that we want students to be able to explore and use their reading and writing in combination. So their discovery, exploration, and combine that with discussion. Lots of discussion in your classroom is going to lead to a lot more vocabulary. So what did we see? We talked about a little bit of the feature analysis. And if we go back to that feature guide, what we did was we circled both the affixes and the Greek and Latin roots. Those were our 2 key areas that we saw with her feature analysis. So, what are our overall thoughts? Just looking at it in general before we say, what are we going to do with this student? Meaning is key. Using concept sorts. Let her sort them. You can provide the words, she can add to those words, but let her figure out what those sorts are going to be. You don't necessarily at this stage have to tell her how, unless it's something that's fairly new that you know she doesn't have a whole lot of background. Then a little bit more teacher direction is helpful. Dictionary use. We get away from dictionary use, but we can use it whether it's online or the actually old-fashioned paperback or hardback dictionary, because we'll see roots in there. Greek and Latin roots are written. Syllables. There's multiple affixes. A dictionary is a great resource for vocabulary development. Etymology. So word origins. Someone who's interested in vocabulary like she is going to be really interested in finding out more about words. Where do they come from? Why is that a Greek root? Why is it a Latin root? Why do we add tion? Why did we change things in the English dictionary, or excuse me, the American dictionary from the English dictionary? All these things happen, and that goes back to word origins. Unstressed syllables. That dreaded schwa sound. Those are always, the schwa sound gives students difficulty. Can they hear it? Can they not? So a lot of times that's going to be a place that we really want to work with and continue our work with this student. Similar pronunciations of suffixes. We talked about that, the shun, and shun, so to speak, on when do we use the tion? When do we use sion? When would we use cian, like as in physician? And there are specific rules that we can apply and share with students that they can start to see, oh yeah, I remember, this is where I would use a tion. And then they'll start being familiar with those words. absorbed and assimilated prefixes like ob in opposition and position. Again, we've got this meaning relationship and the relationship between these words. Word roots. We have the Greek and Latin elements, word lists, ideas on how to sort. There's tons of ideas on how to do word sorts on page 285. And then also advanced suffix study, like able and ibble. Like when we talked about that, she actually made a mistake with the A and the I in visible. And how can we teach her the types of words to look for where we're going to use the ABLE versus the IBLE? So in going through and deciding what we're going to use with this student, for instance, on the derivational relations stage and the issues that she had, I went to the activities area in your text between 294 and 309. As I was going through those, I was really focusing on the affixes and the Greek and Latin roots. And these are just 5 different activities that jumped out to say these would be great activities to do with her and other students in the classroom that are at a similar level so they can start to develop and doing a little bit more using and a little less confusing. We have 8.3, which is a we think activity using the TION and the SION. There's a Latin Jeopardy. Again, many of us are familiar with Jeopardy and the students love playing games, but let's do it with Latin roots, or we could even do that with Greek. A word part shuffle. Here's an all Greek to us, and which suffix. All of these are great ideas, great ways to use games or activities with students, one-on-one, teacher-directed, or have your students work together. I hope that this was helpful, that you were able to learn a little bit about how we analyze the data for the upper level spelling stage. And if you have any questions, feel free to go back through the PowerPoint on the areas that you were confused, and please go back to the video so you can listen to the student again, make some of those comments she did when she was spelling her words.